The Waves of Tech is the down-to-earth tech podcast for you, your family, and your friends. We remove all the complicated, drawn-out explanations of technology and simply talk about how technology is influencing every element of our lives, from social media and the cloud to tweeting and mobile communication. We talk tech in a different way. So plug in your devices and listen as we get ready to ride the Waves of Tech.
On episode 411 of The Waves of Tech, Alex Jones banned 9 niche social networks and common tech courtesy. The Waves of Tech is powered by modernlife.network, modern issues, modern discussions. Well, Steve, welcome into 411. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm actually doing very well, and I don't know how you say 9 niche social networks. I could probably never rattle that off the quick tongue.
Well, if you replay the first 2 takes I had of that, you'd understand that I can't say that. You know, sometimes things written on a piece of paper or in a Google Doc don't really come off the tongue as easily as you think, so I'm glad for the power of editing. That's one of the beautiful things about podcasting, and one of the beautiful things about not podcasting live, which is so nice. So, Steve, we're going to dive right into it now. 27 years ago, the World Wide Web went live, right, Steve? I don't remember this because I was only 9 years old at the time, but I know back in 1991, this was an event. This was historic. So do you have any stories or any sort of interest or memory from August 6, 1991?
Well, actually, it's kind of a hidden thing when it comes to the history of the internet and the progression of it. And I was involved during that time because I was working for the federal government, and we were doing some testing with some of these technologies and things like this. But let's kind of remember something in that they're more integrated now. We really, terminology-wise, don't have a distinction between internet and World Wide Web as much as we did in the earlier times, where the internet actually became something of prior to this date, which is actually the technologies, communications, and backbone of how all this works. And then leading up to the World Wide Web, which ended up being a hypertext protocol-based system, primarily for colleges and institutions to be able to share information. And then we began the progression of what we have today. To be honest with you, we wouldn't have a lot of the technologies and devices that we have today. Because if you think about it, if we had our smartphones like we have right now, what value are they if there's no internet and web? It's still just a mobile telephone. It's not a smartphone with all the capabilities. We wouldn't be able to do things like this podcast we're doing right now and so on and so forth. So I think it's really important to go back in time and celebrate these milestones of technology history, and certainly when it comes to something like the World Wide Web.
Yeah, pretty incredible to look back and just in a short 27-year span to see where internet technology has come. You know, you said from just hypertext with the use of, tuned into educational institutions, and now, essentially every job, every function that we have has some form of internet connectivity or technological influence. And, sometimes in life, things take 25, 50, 75, 100 years to get moving along and to transform. And just think of where technology companies have become over the last 27 years and what the internet has provided to us over the last 27 years. So it's actually moved relatively quickly, Steve, compared to a lot of different industries and a lot of different spaces. So happy birthday, I guess, to the World Wide Web, and we'll celebrate you next year as well. Steve, I did want to bring up the Alex Jones and the InfoWars ban that has been going on with the tech companies. And Steve, I got to be honest with you and our listener base and our friends that are out there that are listening, is that I had not heard of this Alex Jones individual before all the news hit through all of the Twitter accounts and through the BuzzFeed news, and after Facebook and YouTube and Spotify and Stitcher and Apple came on board and said that they've actually removed Alex Jones from all of their social media and also from any of their platforms that his content is being delivered. I know you didn't hear about Alex Jones. I don't know who he is, so it was actually interesting to go back and kind of see his history as this sort of conspiratorial news anchor, that's really just sending content of a lot of hate speech and a lot of different things, down the pipeline. And Steve, it really broke news today. Apple had moved first, and they actually removed the entire library for 5 of InfoWars' 6 podcasts from its iTunes and podcast app. Among those were his popular shows, Alex Jones Show, and his podcast called War Room. So he's a prominent conspiracy theorist, and he's thrown out crazy ideas about things that did not happen with, the World Trade Center attack here in the United States on September 11th. He's thrown out crazy conspiracies about the Sandy Hook school shooting out there in the States in Connecticut, that it actually never happened, and even put footage out there that says that during the Parkland High School shooting in Florida that there were crisis actors that were actually, posing as survivors. And so he has thrown out a lot of different conspiracy theories that have fallen on deaf ears, but obviously have gained interest of a lot of people. For example, YouTube went out and struck down his account, which had 2.4 million subscribers, saying that he had violated their 3 strikes policy, essentially, and that repeatedly the user, this is Alex Jones, violated their policies against hate speech and harassment. And so they've also tried to circumvent some of their enforcement measures in their enforcement policy. So they've actually terminated their accounts. And Steve, again, I didn't know about this guy, and it's quite an interesting, span of events, because as we look, YouTube back in July 24th, they actually removed 4 of his videos, and then Facebook came down on July 26th and hit some of his pages with a 30-day ban. Spotify actually deleted their episodes from their platform. Of course, Stitcher came in and pulled all their episodes. Apple followed suit yesterday and did the same thing, and then Facebook came out today and said that they had removed 4 pages. And I just want to give some of the statements from Apple and YouTube and Facebook just to kind of frame sort of what this individual is about. Apple's statement was, Apple does not tolerate hate speech, and we have clear guidelines that creators and developers must follow to ensure we provide a safe environment for all of our users. Podcasts that violate guidelines are removed from our directory, making them no longer searchable or available for downloading or streaming. We believe in representing a wide range of views so long as people are respectful for those differing opinions. And Facebook came down, Steve, and also said, so what has happened with InfoWars? Why were they up Friday and now they're down? They did come out and say, as a result of reports we received last week, we removed 4 videos on 4 Facebook pages violating our hate speech and bullying policies. They go on to list the names of the pages and say that they were actually put on a 30-day ban for his role in posting violating content to their pages. And they said since that 30-day ban, more content from the same pages has been reported to Facebook. Upon review, they have taken down the pages for glorifying violence, which actually violates, again, their graphic violence policy, and using dehumanizing language to describe people who are transgender, Muslim, and immigrants, which also violates our hate speech. YouTube just came out with a really short statement, Steve, and said that it violates their terms of service and the agreement with the user and them. But Steve, this is an unprecedented act that's been taking place with these 5 or 6 tech companies. I can't remember off the top of my head one actor or player in the social media space that has essentially been swept out of the scene by being banned on 5 or 6 different platforms. I think this is a major statement. And Steve, I think once Apple sort of made that move to start removing their content permanently, everybody else followed suit. I think they were just waiting for that one company to do it. And as we were talking pre-show, Steve, Apple doesn't really care if they violate. If you violate their terms and conditions, you're going to get kicked off. It seems like Facebook, Twitter, some of these other podcast platforms as well have a little bit more tolerance. But I think once one domino falls, everything else goes into place.
Well, it's interesting in the fact that you're right. Somebody had to trigger it first because the criticism has been so heavy of late of these companies removing conservative information, and I'm sure they're timid, but I have never seen the entire technology and social media space come hammering down on a single day like this. I've never listened to the guy, so I don't know, what his content is and his delivery and those kinds of things, but I'll tell you this, I have seen some pretty nasty, vulgar, despicable stuff that I have read and viewed from these social media outlets. And pretty much nothing happens to them. So for them to take all his content down, I'll just say, what does that tell you? It's really got to be pretty bad. Now, let's also remember, let's go back a ways. You know me, Dave. I like to go back in the day. And when Facebook was in its infancy and Google had bought YouTube, the common theme and thought from those 2 companies was, post whatever you want. It's a free society. You're free to talk about or do whatever you want to do. And that was their model. But as time progressed, they had to start taking a different view of this. And the view being, well, if we don't do something to control it, we're going to lose the other half that don't like this. And they fell to criticism. They fell to many things, to include the government, that really decided to move towards a pattern of these are the things that are prohibitive. And that's kind of where we're at right now, even though they do, I think, a fairly good job of scrubbing. I think, and we've talked about this before, I think their scrubbing methods are definitely inferior currently. So with that said, this guy's tanked. He's done. I don't know how else he's going to get his media out. I don't know of any outlet that he would be allowed to sign up to be able to produce and have delivered his rotten content. And I say rotten because I'm assuming, since all these agencies pulled him down, that it's pretty horrific and rotten content. But here's another thing, Dave. 2.5 million followers on YouTube. Some people like his stuff, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where online and in the medium industry do we find the line of what's good, what's bad? It's opinion, right? What might be hate speech to you might not be to me. What might be vulgar to you is not vulgar to me. And we can go on down the list with those categorical type situations, and is it or isn't it? But I think with this instance, Dave, I think we have seen over a period of time and a period of warnings that he is outside the scope of what I would say, what we'll just say the norm is, and all the agencies have had enough and shut him down.
Yeah, I think when you start inciting violence or inciting some sort of speech on your platform that is essentially pushing somebody towards some sort of violent act towards a lifestyle or a race that you don't like, that is obviously, in my opinion, should be the opinions of everybody, that is considered hateful. That is considered an immediate threat to somebody's well-being, and therefore, if Alex Jones and InfoWars videos and podcasts are inciting such action, that makes a lot of sense to get this stuff off, and, I would totally be in favor of that. The interesting part, Steve, is, of course, all of his stuff is still on his website, right? All of his videos, all of his revenue stream is coming from his website, and I found a really interesting article that this guy actually makes most of his money by actually selling his own brand of, nutritional supplements that his massive following goes through. So he's not making a whole lot, via YouTube and these social media channels. It's his way of, getting more exposure and getting his voice and his message out there, but he's like you said, he's been widely criticized, for promoting these very untrue, very unsavory hypotheses, around very, very tragic events. Like I said, a couple school shootings, the World Trade Center attack in New York that killed nearly 3,000 people here in the United States. It's the constant, as you said, the constant vigilance of this guy to keep enforcing his mindset and his incitement to violence towards certain groups of people that ultimately got him banned. And yes, people can go to his website. They can find the stuff. The one thing I'd be really interested, Steve, is I believe GoDaddy at some point recently, I don't remember the company, but they yanked their website hosting service for a company that was doing something similar to Alex Jones. So I don't know whether this website hosting company that has all of Jones' contents is willing to do something else like that. That'll be very interesting, because I know GoDaddy has stepped up a couple times and said, your content will not be available on our platform, go somewhere else. But Steve, I think it all goes back to, there's this social pressure right now to have these social networks clean up the propaganda, the hate speech, the misinformation, the fake news, all that stuff. That's this big political, cultural battle that's all going on within all the tech platforms. It doesn't matter what service you're on. It's on Instagram, it's on Twitter, it's on Facebook, it's on Reddit, it's on every social media platform out there. And the sort of idea that these tech companies have to take care of this business and crack down on this is that step in that direction of, okay, we've seen Facebook fail so many times, we've seen Twitter fail so many times, YouTube has acted somewhat respectfully in this space, but now with such a massive departure of somebody like Alex Jones, I don't know if it really sets the tone for what else they're going to do, unless they're just going to raise their hands and say, hey, this is a small victory and we continue to fight the good fight. I'm not sure. So it's just another one of those things, Steve, where you see the tech companies battling with what culturally and socially we're trying to deal with, when I think ultimately the problem is with us that are using the sites. It's not necessarily the tech platforms. I know it's being used as a way to, retool and rekindle some of these, conspiracy theories and some of the political battles and warfare that's going on. And that's obviously an outlet for it to happen. So flip a coin, Steve, blame it on somebody or some platform. But it's a really interesting statement to see Alex Jones removed from so many platforms in such a swift manner.
I'll just throw in this as a last piece, and that is the twist could also be in his favor. by all these agencies axing him, and this also being U.S. based, he now has an opportunity to take all this information and go sue the stinking snot out of them for many different things within U.S. law. And I hope it doesn't come to that, because I think this kind of filth should not be tolerated. But it does kind of in some way put the shoe on his foot to maybe have some repercussion from all this.
Yeah, there's definitely a possibility. I do think that, Facebook can point to their terms of service, and so can YouTube and, Apple. And, they're definitely not going to, shy away, because I'm sure those corporate lawyers can handle anything that this one guy with a small $2.4 million or 2.4 million subscriber base on YouTube can handle. But it does set a precedent. I think what you're talking about, Steve, is there's some recourse he may have, whether it be small, but it does set a precedent of to what degree are these social networks in charge of filtering information, and what responsibility do they have to remove sort of this really hateful speech and this incitement to violence and these mass trending conspiracies they're obviously high profile hoaxes and unfounded to a large degree. So in my opinion, when it comes to this, Steve, it's not a slippery slope. It's nothing tricky. This guy needs to be removed from these platforms. But when you sort of get into the minutia of what goes on some of these social sites, it can be a slippery slope when you start banning people from the use of your but again, if you're violating their hate speech and you're violating their terms of service, and YouTube has a very strict 3 strikes policy for their community guidelines, there is no turning back from that stuff, Steve. We know that's clearly written in stone, and they enforce it. And once you hit that 3 strike, you're out of there. So I think, as you said, he had plenty of opportunity and fair chances to clean up his act and at least filter his content onto these sites. And eventually everybody said, you know what, I'm done. Be out of here.
So certainly I think his next move could be to go to alternative social media sites, Dave, which I think you're going to discuss.
Yeah, there's one of the interesting things, Steve, is that as we move into these, a variety of social media networks that are out there, of course, we always think of the big 3, right? We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Twitter. There's so many different ones that you can choose from. I came across this really cool article on PC Mag, and I wanted to share that there's these new niche social networks that are being used out there. And of course, it's not for everybody. For Facebook, these networks, they stay small and they serve a very specific demographic or a very specific group of individuals that are looking to network around a certain love or passion or interest. And I did want to share some of these with you. I mean, you can think, right, Steve, Facebook has over 1 billion. It's like 1.3 or 1.4 billion active users, but it's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Not everybody wants to be in there. And, there's obviously a lot of issues associated with that. So, Steve, I know a lot of people like beer, right? You like beer, I like beer. We go to a lot of breweries. We know a lot of different people that enjoy this. So there's this one app called Untapped, and I always consider it just an app. It's a chance for you to check into beers and, get these badges, but it's actually sort of beer drinking on steroids, where it's really an activity. It's a love where you can, search out and find and highlight a lot of your different beers and your regional varieties. And a lot of hardcore beer drinkers are actually flocking to this, and it lets them rate and record, and you can earn badges. As I said, you can connect with friends, you can expand your palates, and it's really become like a must-have app for craft beer community. And it sort of highlights the rise in these microbrews. And it's a great way, Steve. I actually have it on my phone. I never honestly considered it a social network because I've never really used it for that, because I really just connect with my friends, via other social networks on there. But it's a really great way to connect with some other enthusiasts around the world. There's this also really cool one called Dribble. That's DRIBBBLE. And they actually opened to the public in 2010, and they've grown to nearly 500,000 users at this point. And it's a creative sort of social network. It's looking for those that want to share their creative work and also get critiques from actual people who know what they're talking about, Steve. For someone like me who doesn't work in, social media, graphics design or user experience, this isn't going to be an app for me. But for those that are in the space, that are looking to build a portfolio, that are looking to use their ability to link to other stores and products and some of their abilities, this is a really great way where you can connect with a lot of those. And it's an invite-only membership system, which I think is really cool, Steve, because it brings professionals into the network, but it keeps spammers out because they're not willing to pay, or you're not going to invite a spammer into this app. So I thought that was really cool. A couple other ones, Steve, is I don't want to go through all 9 of these, but there's one called Supernatural Connections, and there's this massive boom to lovers of the paranormal, whether that's ghosts, a lot of different things that are going on in that space. There's been tons of movies, there's podcasts about the paranormal, and one of the most popular, as I said, apps is called Supernatural. It's a social network for ghost hunters. And, this article is saying, things are wild. They can get a little woolly out there. And so this is actually a place where members can go and read posts, share posts. And there's like thousands of people out there just adding content to the site day by day. And if you're into like the supernatural and the ghost hunting, which I know is a big thing here in the United States, that's something for you to be interested in. So Steve, I don't want to go through all of them, but there are some really cool things that are out there. We'll have the link up in the show notes from those that are working in the animation discipline to anything from films and movies. There's one called Letterboxd, and there's just so many great ones out there for you guys to look into. I'll have the link in the show notes.
I think for a lot of people, this is well worth researching because I like how you put that, Dave, that some of the bigger ones, Facebook, it's all about because I know that people I know are there versus some of these others of this is something I enjoy. It's not necessarily about the people. It's about a topic. I think that's pretty interesting. I think when it comes to social media, we typically talk about some of the major ones, but I think one that often gets overlooked, I don't use it, I really don't have a need for it, Dave, is Pinterest.
Oh, absolutely.
And Pinterest probably having, probably close to 500 million users. I find it very interesting. It's not something for me, but sometimes I get information from there. But it's a total different way of exchanging information via a pictorial mindset. And I think that's, very interesting. But I think we need to go out and examine some of these other places that we may have an interest in because don't get wrapped up in the status quo. Go find places you like to visit and information that you enjoy. That would be my thing.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, Steve, as I mentioned, like the Untapped, the beer functioning app. I just always consider it just a beer app. I never really define that as a social network. So I'm kind of looking around on my phone right now and sort of looking at what else we would consider perhaps a social network. I kind of look at Yelp, and what they've been able to do. That to me screams social networking because you can have your profile, you can check in, you can share comments, you can share your interests with your other friends. There's so much on there that you can look through, very much like Pinterest, Steve, where you go there for a specific reason. It's all about food. Now Yelp has developed into, where you're able to see goods and services as well on there, auto body shops and tree trimmers and the like. I mean, whatever Yelp is doing, it's working. And so I think sort of what we consider to be quote unquote a social media network, I think based on what the article I read in my thinking now, I need to shift that a little bit because when I'm checking in with my beer and just, sharing what I'm doing and I get to rate it and I get to share it and find out where it is locally where I can buy it, that's all a form of networking. I'm sharing it with my friends. They're telling me why they liked it, why they didn't like it, some variation of that they tried. Maybe it's a seasonal brew, whatever. I need to redefine sort of what I think of as a social media network. It's not just the big 3 or 4 anymore. It's any like-minded application that we use out there that brings us together for some sort of common interest. And that can be any of the ones that I mentioned that we'll have a link in the show notes. I just think it's a very interesting mindset to sort of shift, Steve, and have a different concept of what social networking is all about. LinkedIn, for example, another great social media tool that people use. They see it as a business networking, but there is a social component to it as well.
We thought it was a done deal, Dave, but not really. And what am I talking about? The Justice Department just filed a brief today to appeal the decision of the AT&T and Time Warner merger. And in the brief, they're really getting into, I think, an area that's not going to be well received, but they're pretty much saying that the judge really didn't have knowledge of really what this was about and the insight and some of the impacts, some things like that. I don't think they're going to take kindly to that. The circuit is probably going to say, no, the appeal is rejected. I think from the beginning, the Justice Department blew it on behalf of the people, and we're kind of stuck with it. So I'm going to keep it short, Dave, but it's back.
Yeah, and these are interesting ththings, right, Steve? The mergers, either they sail through the courts and the process for approval without any without any hiccups, without any bumps. And then sometimes you have the AT&T and Warner, Steve, Time Warner always seems to be part of this, right? It's something that always follows them as a company, and not so much AT&T, but Time Warner always seems to be coming up in these, these contentious, acquisitions and these mergers. And yeah, it's going to, hopefully they're going to overturn a lower court's appeal. And yeah, in short, Steve, it's really just the department's argument is that the judge made a series of mistakes by not considering all the facts, and most of those facts that they said were mistaken were essentially in the economic analysis that were approving the merger. And the appeal actually says that the judge had clearly erred in his analysis and said that the resulting decision is, quote, contrary to fundamental economic logic and the evidence. That's a pretty bold statement to make towards a judge, especially at the federal level. But still, Steve, the judge's analysis, it's being shown as internally inconsistent, that he erred by not properly considering evidence that the merger would lead to price increases instead of price decreases. And so there's a number of questions that, the department is now arguing that were unfounded by this judge. So it'll be interesting. I mean, Steve, I don't know if I know I didn't. Did you read the 172-page decision? With all the evidence and rendering associated with it? I didn't, because I don't have the time or the comprehension to read something like that. But I don't know if it's going to disrupt perhaps the approval. I think it's probably just going to take a little bit longer for it to get through the courts now.
I have not read it, because even if I did, I wouldn't have understood it.
You and me both, buddy.
It'd be like mumbo jumbo. You might as well be talking Greek to me, right? That's the way it is, especially here in this country. That's how our systems work. The DOJ pretty much slapped that judge, so it'll be interesting to see how that's taken. Finally, Dave, I want to tread light on something that to me was a little disturbing. I know as time goes and new generations are on this earth that things change. Things are looked at differently. And if you are one of these, I don't mean to upset you, but I think you need to think about a few things. In a couple of examples, my wife and I were at dinner one night last week, and there was a mother and father and a child that came in, and they were ordering and stuff. My wife and I are having dinner. All of a sudden, we hear this loud noise, like movie cartoons or whatever the case may be, right? And instead of parents having a conversation with a child, they handed them a phone to entertain themselves during dinner, and also disrupting our dinner because of the loudness of this, as a kind of a babysitting mechanism, I guess. I find it in a public environment unacceptable. I was not happy. I didn't want to listen to crazy cartoons and hear a kid laughing or crying or whatever the case may be. And I hope those parents will take into consideration in the future that you need to take those quality times that are available to you and cherish them, and do your child a favor and talk to them. Don't stuff some kind of electronic device in their face to make them be quiet, or because you don't want to listen to them, or whatever the case may be. We have got to get back to being humans that communicate, that have passion, that want to learn, that want to accept responsibility and not hand it over to an electronic device, plus bothering people that are next to you that really don't want to listen to this stuff. And then over this weekend, we had a similar issue with two mothers. One mother was breastfeeding, whips it out, and it just gets on her phone and starts watching things on the internet while she's breastfeeding. I understand breastfeeding, but I don't understand the disruption and having to have your mind so preoccupied with stuff that's on our stinking phones or the internet or whatever the case may be, instead of taking care of the basic necessities of life with a child. And that's, I'm sorry, but I think that's where some of the new generational components and technology are failing us.
I can't agree with you more, Steve. It's, my wife and I have noticed as we've been traveling, from different cities, and just hanging out also at dinner places, and going out to eat, that that over the last 3-4 years, it's definitely spiked. I mean, there's been times, Steve, when I know you and I have been in a restaurant, we've looked over and there's been a couple or a family on their phones during an entire meal. I mean, we're talking 60 minutes where the only words that are spoken is to the waiter to place an order. And then otherwise it's back to your phone. And it is sad, Steve, that, the common occurrence now is to shove a screen in front of a child, regardless of age, whether they're 6 months old, a year old, or they're 17 years old, to essentially have that babysitter go with you day in and day out. And Steve, I don't have the problem with, a younger child sitting at a restaurant with a device, because I remember growing up, Steve, you guys would bring us coloring books and crayons, and we would have, we'd have little games that we can bring, whether it's a set of cards, whether it's a coloring book, an own book to read. I mean, there are ways to engage and create, teachable, lovable moments with your students or with your children. But the moments that noise and that disruption comes from that device, from either blaring YouTube videos or whether that's movies, whether it's music, whatever it is, that's where it crosses the line of just being pure disrespectful, Steve. I can understand, sitting quietly at a table, I put on the earphones, whatever, perhaps not the best, parenting 101, to throw out there. But if you're going to do it, at least do it respectfully and in a fashion that's not going to ruin, some people's evenings. And Steve, it just puts people like you and I and other patrons that are visiting a restaurant or a movie theater or any other place out in public, it puts us in a very awkward situation, because then we have to be the ones that tell somebody to turn down the volume because it's being disruptive to us. And then that just potentially causes an unwelcome social scene, or even perhaps some altercation with someone else that you're sitting next to. And Steve, I know we've all sort of been selfish, as a society for a number of years, but this is like the epitome of selfishness, right? Is it doesn't matter who's around, it doesn't matter the circumstance or the setting I'm in. If I want to be on my phone and I want to listen to it full blast, I'm going to do it. And I think it's a sad state of affairs in which we live in. And yeah, Steve, it's very sad to see just sort of the default reaction is just to shove something in a child's face and it's good enough. I mean, I didn't grow up with devices in my hands, and guess what? I turned out just fine. And I had great times hanging out at restaurants, and I had great times hanging out with family and just enjoying the moment rather than being so worried about watching the next YouTube video that comes out. So I'm with you on this one. Some common courtesy of using technology in the public is much needed. I will say that probably 90% of us use this, have some good etiquette and some common courtesy, but it's that fringe, it's that 10% of people that are out there just completely running amok and really ruining a lot of good experiences for a lot of people out there.
I guess we could do an entire separate podcast on I turned out just fine, Dave.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That could be a name of a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it'd be a big hit, but I think the differential for me anyway, when you talk about coloring books versus, let's say, a tablet or whatever, the audio. But I think coloring book, you can still converse with, that's pretty, blue hair, and, how was school today. I think you can still have a conversation, but when it's a device stuck to the nose, I think that conversational piece expires and it's no longer available. So I hear you. I just think we need to be more courteous. There are other people living in our environment and around us, and we need to tip our hat and be polite when it comes to people enjoying things that we do in the public life.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. And it's disheartening, I will say, to see so many families that go out and it's not a moment of spending time together. I mean, if you wanted to do that, you could stay at home and save a lot of money and just go to your own separate rooms. It's not making it any better. It's just, I don't really understand the idea of going out to dinner and then just completely ignoring each other. That doesn't register with me. How that makes it any better in living and growing as a couple, as a family, and within a relationship. I just can't see beyond that. And I see these times as opportunity to sort of people watch and enjoy and get out there and talk about your food and share about how your day went. I mean, there's enough distraction, Steve, in between work and taking care of kids and having the house maintained and having your cars worked on and podcasting and family and holidays and travel and back to school. I mean, you can go on the list of things that keep us distracted. It's a matter of recognizing how having our phones in our hands, in our pockets 24/7 keeps us really distracted and really pulls away from some memories that we really could be creating for a lifetime. So I'm with you, man. It's a tough spot we're in, I think, in 2018. And I think it's slowly recognizing how we can, I think it's self-recognition, Steve, that we can say, all right, what do I need to do to be a little bit more aware and in the moment than just always being on our phone. And I think that's a personal decision. There'll be, of course, people that never, stand up to that or want to live by that sort of mantra. But I think it needs to be revisited.
I've always looked at going to dinner not as a nutritional part of life per se, but also for social engagement. And technology doesn't take care of everything for us. We also have to have those human needs fulfilled, and that's only through conversation.
I agree. Well, Steve, I think that's going to wrap up this episode. And so thank you, everybody, for continued support of this podcast. And if you're over there on the podcast app through Apple, go ahead and head over and just give us a nice rating and review. It would be nice to hear from you guys on how the podcast is going, what you guys want to see, what you think about it. Of course, meet up with us on social media, where I guarantee you I won't tweet you during a dinner. So head over to @TheWavesOfTech is where the podcast is at specifically. And of course, you can connect with Steve over there at Modern Life Pods. Well, The Waves of Tech is powered by modernlife.network. Thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to keep on teching.